Hello and welcome to the agenda. I am Ajay Kaul. In this program today, we will be discussing about the present state of country's economy. Coronavirus and months of lockdown continue to cause havoc with the country's economy. The economy is in the shambles and there are worries about the future as corona cases continue to rise, hampering the restoration of economic cycle. The situation is such that some state governments are said to be running out of money to pay their employees. The central government and the RBI are making efforts to contain the damage. Are these efforts sufficient and effective? We will analyze this in the agenda today with the experts on economy, Professor Arun Kumar and Akash Jindal. But before we start our conversation, let us have a look at this small report.
The country's economy continues to witness deep trouble thanks to coronavirus and the lockdowns. In her latest statement, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman today said the act of God may result in contraction of the economy for the current financial year. Her statement comes after assessments that crores of salaried people have lost jobs, crores have suffered salary cuts, and crores of others in the unorganized sector have lost livelihood. Also, the consumption has dropped sharply along with demand and supply. In a nutshell, the economic activity has reached the lowest level and there are no hopes of the situation improving in the near future. The situation has reached such a level that some states are said to be having problems in paying salaries even to the employees. This has led to demands by the states for GST compensation from the centre besides other financial support. The centre today said the GST collection has been severely impacted and is going to record a shortfall of rupees 2.35 lakh crore in the financial year 2020-21. Meanwhile, RBI Governor Shaktikant Das today said the central bank can give estimates on growth and inflation once there is clarity on COVID-19 curve and other aspects. He said the RBI has not exhausted its ammunition, whether on rate cuts or other policy actions. He said proactive raising of capital will be crucial to improve resilience of banks and financial sector. Das said it was obvious that banks will face stress, but more important is how banks react and respond to the challenge. Clearly, the situation is very grim and the government has a huge task on hand. Bureau Report.
Let's welcome our guests, Professor Arun Kumar and Mr. Akash Jindal. My first question is to Professor Arun Kumar. Sir, how bad is this situation?
So, when lockdown was announced in March 25th, and it was continued for April, the economy was only producing essentials. It wasn't working very much. So my estimate is that the economy was only working at 25% capacity. So it was down by 75% compared to last year. And now it has revived a little bit as the unlock procedure started. And now it may be working at about 50% of capacity. Agriculture, of course, can work, but even in agriculture, there was a lot of problem because a lot of vegetables and fruits could not come to the market. Milk also could not be properly utilized and was wasted. Eggs and the chicken, there was a fall in the production of those commodities. So even if we say that agriculture was working fully, that is also not quite correct. But the point is that, if we take agriculture as working and some other sectors, but major sectors like hotels and restaurants and, things like airport and airlines, entertainment, tourism, those have been way down, maybe about 10% or 20% of capacity. Railways, passenger trains, used to run 14,000 passenger trains every day. They are running only about 1,000 trains now. So that's also down to roughly about 10% of capacity. So all told, my own estimate is that at the moment the economy is not working at more than 50% capacity. So even if it starts recovering now, and we're not sure whether it will recover quickly because there's always a danger of the pandemic spreading, and we are still rising number of cases. The first round is still rising, and from October, November, there could be a second round attack. So it's a very uncertain situation. So we can say that at a very, very optimistic guess, the economy will be down by at least 15% compared to last year. But at a pessimistic level, it will be down about 35% compared to last year. So as a result of that, tax collection will also be way down, because taxes are collected from incomes and from production and consumption. And because incomes are down, production and consumption are down, so I think there'll be a huge shortfall in GST, there'll be a huge shortfall in corporate tax collection and income tax collection. So all told, that's why the state governments are finding their resources are short, because from GST they used to get about half the tax collection, and that percentage is down. Then from the center, whatever is collected, 42% is passed on to the states. But if the center is collecting less, then the state share will come down, and then the compensation that the states used to get, that will be down, and that's why the state's financial position is down. So I think the fiscal deficit will be very high compared to what it was last year. So government's resource position, both of the center and the states, is very, very poor. So all told, there's unemployment, there's decline in output, there's a bad position for the government in terms of its tax revenues, its fiscal deficit will be quite high, its borrowing requirements will be high, and the consumer sentiment is down and the investment sentiment is also down. So it's a very poor situation at the moment, and we don't know how quickly it can come out of this.
As you just mentioned that the government resources are declining, and we have the latest statement that the government says GST collection is going to have a shortfall of 2.35 lakh crore for the year 21, financial year 21. So is it making the situation more worse if the government revenues drop and resources drop? Is it so?
Yes. So, GST is collected, from non-essentials more than from essentials, So the non-essentials or luxury items or sin goods, they pay 43%, 28% and so on. And the essential items either at 0% or 5% or 12%. So because the non-essential items and luxury items, their production is down, so therefore the tax collection from those items will be down. And those items which are, taxed less, they are the ones whose production will be more. So therefore you can see the tax collection will decline. Then, the only saving grace is that the government has increased the tax collection from petroleum goods by not passing on the price, benefit to the consumer and putting it as tax. Now that is a saving grace. Otherwise, the tax collection from GST would have been about half of what, from not GST but indirect taxes would have been about half of what it had collected last year.
Okay, let me now turn to Mr. Akash Jindal. Mr. Jindal, how serious is the situation? The finance minister now says today that the act of God may result in contraction of economy. So how do you see the situation?
The reality is, situation is very, very serious. Now, let me share some data with you. Unemployment rate is at 9.1%. Expectation from GDP growth is minus, that is negative 4% for this year. This is the situation. Now, what happened was, in the month of June, there was an expectation that now Corona would keep on reducing and we'll keep on unlocking. Now, the problem has intensified because in the month of July and August, we have seen a second wave of Corona. Corona is now spreading to B and C grade towns in the interior. So I don't think we have got any substantial relief from Corona, and the finances are in a real mess. See, one thing we have to remember, prior to Corona also, let's take the month of December 2019, January 2020, February 2020, the economy was not at all in a great shape. That time also, it was a period of recession. We were talking about GDP growth of 4.7%, 5%. Sub 5% GDP growth is what we were talking and discussing about. Prior to that, US-China trade war had a huge impact on Indian economy. So this pandemic took place when the economy was already weak. The economy was already in a very poor condition. Then the pandemic took place. Now things are getting intensified. As far as fiscal deficit is concerned, yes, I endorse my friend. Fiscal deficit is going to be quite high because anyway the central government had to do borrowing. during those lockdown months also. And this financial year, the most interesting thing, which we all know, the financial year itself began when we were in the lockdown. The lockdown was most severe when the financial year started. Now what has happened is tax collections have come down, GST collections have come down. Now interestingly, 2019-20 state GST collection, your overall GST collections have been reduced. Now my organization Akashindal.in has done an extensive and detailed study. So what happens is, when the collections are down, the compensation which center owes to states, it automatically increases. How does the center compensate that? Now, center collects cess on sinful items or some other items. Now, would the cess increase? Because all these items, luxurious items or items of sinful nature, the consumption is not going to be that high. Because what happens is, people are busy in buying their essentials. Money is being spent on atta, dal, doodh. So, naturally the cess has to be lesser. So now the compensation has to be done from the compensation fund. How does center compensate the states? Now, what states are saying is, and states need money because states need to fund development activities, they need to fund welfare activities, they are also fighting pandemic, so they need money. Center, it doesn't have money, that sort of money in the compensation fund. Now, as far as GST collection is concerned, we all know so many people have lost their jobs. In many cases, what has happened is people's salaries have been converted into incentives. Now, salaries being converted into incentives in the month of April, May, June, what it means is that if somebody was having a salary of 1 lakh rupees, the incentive would be perhaps 25,000-30,000 rupees because anyway things are not selling. So what it means, people's incomes have reduced, so demand has reduced, so GST collection will be lesser. Now to address the specific point, whether center should compensate the states or not. So I have an idea. I think we need out-of-box solution. What we should do is the center should resort to borrowing. The amendment should be made. They should borrow and they should give compensation to the states. And then, in order to make up for that, the cess should be allowed to be raised beyond 2022. That way, the center would also have the resources. That sort of out-of-the-box ideas are required.
The government only today says that it owes, I think 1.5 lakh crores is due to the states for the last 4 months of the GST.
That's what I'm saying. Now, the GST, when we talk about, basically it's compensation. Now, how do we tackle that? I mean, yes, the states need money. When the states say that we need money, we desperately need money. My organization, Akashindal.in, totally supports that because states do need money. They need money for development. They need money for welfare. They are fighting the pandemic, which itself is a burdensome exercise. But does the center have money? Because we have began the financial year in a lockdown. Last year also the compensation has increased because the tax collection was lesser. So where does the center get money from? That's why I'm saying we need some out-of-the-box ideas. This is one suggestion, which is my personal suggestion, that center should resort to borrowing. That borrowing should be used through the compensation fund. Amendment should be made, suitable amendment should be made. That should be used to fund the states. And in lieu of that, the GST Council should end the cess which was up to 2022. That should be allowed for more years. That sort of solution we need because we need to borrow from the future now as of now, to tackle this situation, to tackle this time. Because these are extraordinary times. These are difficult situations. Nobody expected that. All of us know also in the month of February, nobody knew. In the month of February, we were having parties. Nobody knew that pandemic would be in such a situation. We knew that yes, Corona is there. But nobody knew that on 23rd March or 25th March, we'll have a lockdown. And the lockdown would keep on extending. Still, as I've told you, in the States, you know very well. You are a very senior news person. You have in-depth knowledge yourself. In States, in interiors, Corona is spreading. So we can't say that we have got substantial relief from Corona. So finances, mobilization, demand. Now, what I am thinking is that perhaps what we were earlier anticipating is that July, August are going to improve. So we'll have a good Diwali, or we'll post Diwali. The bumper North Indian marriage season, Saha, would be there. But now the way things are going, now the way things are happening in the interiors, I don't think we are going to have a colorful Diwali or we are going to have a good Diwali sale. Or even post Diwali, I don't think marriages are going to happen in the lavish way, which we expected earlier. So that Saha is also not going to be that sort of buying opportunity, according to my organization, akashindal.in. So how do we collect GST? So we have to borrow from the future and spend it now. We have to borrow from the future and give it to our states. That's how our states can run. Because ultimately the welfare activities have to be done by the states. Pandemic is spreading. Pandemic is spreading to smaller towns.
Let me
we
now
need
ask,
relief operations.
Let me now ask Professor Arun Kumar, the government and RBI trying to contain the situation. How do you see, is it adequate? Are they addressing the situation properly?
So, the problem, as Mr. Jindal also has been saying, is that demand is down and supply has frozen. This is a situation that has never been faced by the world economy earlier, when both supply and demand are in trouble. Supply bottlenecks are there wherever there's lockdown, and therefore it affects production. So your production capacity
I think the RBI even yesterday report said that consumption is also declining, has declined a lot.
Well, that's what I'm coming to.
Yeah.
I'm coming to that. First is that supply keeps getting bottleneck, and therefore, your production capacity has come down. Second is, as I said, the demand is down because both investment and consumption have come down dramatically. You have a large unorganized sector, which is 94% of the employment, and there the loss of job was for about 200 million people. So CMIE says 122 million people lost employment, but according to my estimate,
that is salaried class only. They have not touched the unorganized.
No. Salaried class is only
1.8
million.
Yeah.
Salaried class is 14 million. The unorganized sector is 200 million.
Okay.
So in the CMIE estimate, it's 122 million losing employment. My estimate is 200 million people. So roughly about 800 million people have gone below the poverty line, and therefore their consumption has been affected very badly. And that's why the rate of growth of the economy will be more like, at a very optimistic guess, as I said, minus 15%. At a pessimistic guess, it will be minus 35% below last year. So every aspect of demand is down. So government needed to intervene to generate demand. And what the government has done in its 20 lakh crore package is only 2 lakh crore has been given out of the budget for, improving consumption. The rest is in the form of package of credit and so on. Now, when the economy is down and production is down, then people don't take credit. And that's why when RBI lowered the repo rate and the reverse repo rate in an attempt to try and get the banks to give credit to the businesses, banks are saying that businesses are not coming forward to take credit because they are not investing and they are producing much less. So apart from, say, a few sectors like pharma sector, FMCG sector, some part of IT sector, apart from these, all other sectors are down. So only these sectors cannot sustain the economy for a while.
So credit offtake is also low then, no, isn't it?
That's right. So that's why I'm saying credit offtake is low because, if production is down and investment is down, then credit offtake will be low. And that's why banks are parking 8 lakh crores of rupees with the RBI to earn the reverse repo rate. So therefore, the RBI is saying we are reducing the reverse repo rate. You please lend to the businesses, but banks are saying businesses are not coming forward. Second is that the banks are worried about NPAs rising, and that's why they are also a bit cagey about lending. So even though sovereign guarantees being offered by the government of India, they are still not willing to come forward and lend more. So in other words, you have a situation in which the RBI is trying to pump in liquidity, cut CRR, cut the reverse repo rate, but that's not having an effect on investment. And what the government is doing is it's looking for supply side responses, whereas the problem is demand side. So government needed to increase employment, say under the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It has increased the allocation from 60,000 crores to 1 lakh crore, but in my estimate, it should have raised it to about 4 lakh crores. And similarly, the poor people who have lost employment in the urban areas, they needed to start employment schemes in the urban areas also, so that some purchasing power can be pumped into the poor people's hand who have lost income. Then, transfer of money to the poor people, also has to be increased so that they can increase their purchases. When they increase their purchases, then the demand for businesses would rise, and then capacity utilization will rise. As Mr. Jindal was saying, the economy was weak even before February, and in capacity utilization was down to 70%. Now it is down to roughly even 40% or 30%, or in the airlines industry to 25%, in hotel industry to 10%. So at that level, the investment will not revive. So investment will revive only when demand is pumped up, and for that the government has to increase its fiscal deficit and give purchasing power to the bottom 80% of the population. Then some demand will start reviving. But that will mean that the fiscal deficit will climb very high. It is not going to be at 10% or 15% level. The fiscal deficit will rise to about 30-35% of the GDP, because GDP itself has fallen from 204 lakh crore to 130 lakh crore this year. So therefore, it's a very difficult situation that is going to take place in the economy.
Okay, Mr. Jindal, as Mr. Arun Kumar, Professor Arun Kumar was saying, like the government has announced the credit facilities and credit offtake, credit for debt for this addressing the situation. But credit offtake is low because banks are also averse to give credit and loans. And in fact, RBI governor today only said that banks should not be so averse. So how do you see the situation?
You are very right. In fact, Arunji is right when Arunji says that businesses are not coming forward to borrow. I mean, one is what you have said, Kausar, that banks are not keen to lend because you know all the entire NPA story. We all know the NPA issue. But on the other side, are businesses coming forward for borrowing? Businesses are also not coming because there's a very interesting situation. Now, what happened is my organization, akashindal.in, has done some first-hand surveys with businessmen, businesses. Now, what happened was permissions were given to certain showrooms, certain outlets to open in the month of June and July. But when I spoke to all those businessmen who were well-settled businessmen who had lots of walk-ins prior to February or January, who had lot of sales, they say, yes, we have opened our organization, but people are not walking in with demand. So wherever businesses are open also, or wherever businesses are opening also, people are not walking in to buy. People are not entering showrooms to buy costumes, to buy footwear, going to other things, or even people are not ordering that sort of food from restaurants. So basically, yes, some opportunities are there in the economy, but demand and consumption is not there. So once the businessman sees that demand is not there, consumption is not there, my organization, Akash, in the dot and feed that businessman doesn't come ahead to borrow because businessman would only increase his capacity. Businessmen would only invest. See, businessmen are hard-headed people. They would only invest when they know that, yes, this money I am going to get returned, whereas I can return the bank as well as I can make some profit on that. That situation is not there. So basically what we need to do is we need to generate demand. Demand has to be generated. Demand is something which can make the economy moving. So I have been saying this thing. I would repeat it on different channels. My organization, akashindal.in, has been saying that though the tax collections are lesser, I would rather toss an unpopular idea. Still, I would suggest in this scenario also, the government should reduce GST and income tax. What would happen is there would be money in the hands of people. People would go and buy. And when people would go and buy, that would somehow make the GDP go. That would mean that the economy works, that the economy grows faster. Then what happens is the volume would increase, and volume increase in turn would mean the same amount of GDP or income tax collection, because with higher volumes and lesser tax rate, I think we'll end up at the same position. Because we need to increase the demand. The demand has to be increased. Of course, credit is something which increases the demand. Here also, I would also suggest the government that the government should sit with the RBI and with the banks, and government must come out with the ways how the interest on this EMI moratorium would be compensated by the government. So I don't feel that this idea is a good idea, wherein people are made to pay interest on interest also. There also, the government should sit with RBI, sit with the banks, and government should compensate, or government should give some subvention so that banks are also partially compensated, and interest on interest is not charged from people who have availed of the EMI moratorium. Because see, we have to say what is the position of the people. See, people had not planned this. The way people's jobs have gone, the way people have been compelled to sit at home, the way people's salaries have been rolled back. So people's finances have basically gone berserk, so they don't know how to pay their home loan EMIs. On one hand, our government has come with such a nice idea, housing for everyone. But now if people are not in a position to pay their EMIs and they have to pay interest on that, on the deferred loan or moratorium, if they have taken EMI moratorium, how would things work? Similarly, talk about the MSMEs, small industrialists.
Even
Basically,
if one opts for this moratorium, you have to pay taxes interest later on, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That you have to pay interest later on. Now that's what I'm saying. The government should sit with RBI and the banks, and the government should try and compensate the banks so that people don't have to pay interest on interest. Because how would somebody pay additional interest? Somebody who has not earned anything for 3 months of lockdown, somebody whose salary has been rolled back, converted into an incentive, which is just 30% of the salary, somebody whose business is not earning anything, how do you expect him to pay interest on interest? So those are things which need to be seen, looking.
Okay,
So
Mr.
I
Arun
think
Kumar.
there,
Mr. Arun Kumar,
the government needs to help the borrower. The economy needs to be helped. The government needs to have that sort of approach. The government has come out with a 20 lakh crore package. I praise the government for that package. They have done a nice effort. But now they should help the banks and RBI also, that people are not made to pay interest on interest.
Okay, Professor Arun Kumar, Mr. Jindal has raised some valid points, like money should be given to the hands of the people so that demand increases and consumption increases. Like he has a suggestion of GST cuts in rates, cuts in GST rates, and maybe exemption. In fact, I also have been favoring IT maybe exemption for 1 year, this pandemic year. How do you see this?
So, you have to look at the overall balance in the economy. As I said, the fiscal deficit or the lower GDP will be running at about 35% of the GDP. So if you cut GST and you cut income tax, your fiscal deficit will rise to about 45% of GDP, which is unprecedented, And therefore, my suggestion would be that at this point you need to generate employment, especially in the category of poor people who have lost employment. That's the first step that is required, because otherwise they will not be able to survive and there will be a societal breakdown. So all your resources will be required to fight the pandemic and fight the poverty, because 800 million people have slipped below the poverty line because of the problem of employment and migration to the rural areas, etc. So that should be our first charge, and that will increase demand. And if you pump in, purchasing power into their hand, demand will rise. Now, if you pump in purchasing power to the hands of the middle class and the upper middle class of businesses, they are not going to increase expenditure on discretionary items, because at the moment there's a lot of uncertainty. And that's why, if you give to the upper middle class or you give to businesses, as you saw, the RBI's report says that when the corporate tax was cut, what the businesses did was they only stocked up the money rather than investing. And they're not going to invest because demand is not there. So I think we have to target our policies correctly so that, we don't waste our fiscal space, because fiscal space is very, very small. So I would say that, as far as the MSME sector is concerned, this lumping together of the medium and the small with the micro will do damage to the micro sector. So I think we need separate policies for the micro sector, and there I think their loan, etc. should be actually eased out so that they can revive, because they have worked through their working capital, and therefore their revival will be very difficult. So I think what we need is, very, very graded policy and not across the board. If you cut GST across the board, if you cut income tax across the board, your fiscal deficit will rise without demand rising, because GST cut will lead to a price fall. But unless people begin to spend on the non-essential items, the discretionary items, that demand will not revive. And because of the uncertainty, people will simply hold. And that's why cash holding in the economy has gone up.
Correct.
People are, taking out money from the bank, holding on to cash. People are taking out money from other assets and putting it into mutual funds, because their fixed deposit rates are down and so on and so forth. So real estate also is not very viable option, because real estate has been down for the last 7-8 years.
Right.
And it will be down further because 30 to 40% businesses will fail. Their property will come in the market, and therefore real estate prices will soften. So I think too much investment into real estate is also very unlikely. And that's why I think we have to look at the picture as an overall macro picture of taxation, of real estate, of the share market, of the finances of the middle class, the lower classes and the upper classes. Then only will we be able to find a complete picture of what needs to be done. And the first thing is employment generation. For their poverty, people have gone below the poverty line, putting money into their hands. Otherwise, there will be societal breakdown.
So, in the crux that a holistic approach is needed, and government has a huge task on its hand. We are running out of time. Thank you so much for participating in this debate. This is all in the agenda today. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with another interesting topic tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.